For those who might be unfamiliar, this is Pat Robertson on screen. He's been a televangelist since the 1950s or something. Oh, I'm sorry. No, this is Jerry Falwell. This is Pat Robertson. He's been a televangelist since like the 50s and has said some deeply controversial and messed up and ridiculous stuff that I want to show you in a second, because after I show you all of the crazy stuff that he's said in recent years, I'm going to show you an example of him making an Armageddon prediction, like end times prediction, all the way back in the year 1980. He predicted the end would come by 1982. Absolutely absurd on every level. The first clip that I want to introduce you to with this guy is one where he did a video with Jerry Falwell Sr. Now, if you're unfamiliar with him, he's also a televangelist, or was. He died a few years back. And he was responsible for the state of religion and the government melding to the degree that it has melded to this day. I mean, Jerry Falwell Sr. and Billy Graham and some others worked together to erode the separation between church and state to the best of their ability. And here we see the results today. Pat Robertson also worked to erode that separation, the guy on the left here. But Jerry Falwell really took that on as his pet project. He turned evangelicalism into like a wing of the Republican Party. So, anyways, let me introduce you to Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell Sr. September 13th, 2001, this video came out 2 days after 9/11.
This is the first time that we've been attacked on our soil. First time, and by far, the worst results. And I fear, as Donald Rumsfeld, the Secretary of Defense, said yesterday, that this is only the beginning. And with biological warfare available to these monsters, the Husseins, the Bin Ladens, the Arafats.
It's really interesting to me that, like, hindsight is 2020 now, right? But it was interesting that he mentioned the Husseins in that list, right? So 9/11 takes place. Iraq had literally nothing to do with 9/11. But he throws in Hussein anyways, despite the fact that Saddam Hussein, the most famousest of Husseins at that time, had nothing to do with what happened. It was like he was priming the audience to be ready to accept the Iraq war when George Bush was going to offer that as a solution. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Another example of him trying to meld himself and his movement, the evangelical movement, into the Republican Party.
What we saw on Tuesday, as terrible as it is, could be minuscule if in fact God continues to lift the curtain and allow the enemies of America to give us probably what we deserve.
So what he just said there was relevant and important here. He says, God lifted the veil, lifted the curtain of protection on the United States. And why did he lift that curtain of protection? I hear you asking. Why would God step away and allow such an evil thing to take place? Keep listening.
Well, Jerry, that's my feeling. I think we've just seen the antechamber to terror. We haven't even begun to see what they can do to the major population.
The ACLU's got to take a lot of blame for this.
Oh, yeah.
And I know I'll hear from them for this, but throwing God, or successfully with the help of the federal court system, throwing God out of the public square, out of the schools. The abortionists have got to bear some burden for this, because
God lifted the veil of protection, which made it possible to attack America. So basically, what he's saying is he's blaming the ACLU and quote-unquote abortionists for 9/11 taking place. He's saying if those people did not exist in the United States at the time, 9/11 would not have happened, because God would have been pleased with how we were doing.
God will not be mocked, and when we destroy 40 million little innocent babies, we make God mad. I really believe
That's just propagandistic framing. I don't think I need to do any further analysis on it. That's just BS. That's not what's happening.
I believe that the pagans and the abortionists and the feminists and the gays and the lesbians who are actively trying to make that an alternative lifestyle, the ACLU, People for the American Way, all of them.
People for the American Way, by the by, that's Right Wing Watch now, basically. It's an organization that kind of spun off from People for the American Way.
Who tried to secularize America, I point the finger in their face and say, you helped this happen.
Well, I totally concur.
So that's Pat Robertson and Jerry Falwell 2 days after 9/11. You wouldn't believe what Donald Trump was doing when this interview was happening. He actually called into CNN to tell them that he was at his house, Trump Tower on Fifth Avenue. When this happened, he said the first thing he thought was, I now have the tallest building in Lower Manhattan now that this has taken place. Dead serious. Last time I showed this, I got hit with like a something or other. So I'm not going to put it on screen. Here it is. Okay, I'm not going to. This is what it looks like, but I'm not going to actually put it on screen because last time I did, I got in trouble for it. Listen to what Donald Trump had to say when he called in on September 11th. This was the day that it happened.
Donald, you have one of the landmark buildings down in the financial district, 40 Wall Street. Did you have any damage, or did you know what's happened down there?
Well, it was an amazing phone call I made. 40 Wall Street actually was the second tallest building in downtown Manhattan, and it was actually, before the World Trade Center, was the tallest. And then when they built the World Trade Center, it became known as the second tallest, and now it's the tallest. And I just spoke to my people, and they said it's the most unbelievable site. It's probably 7 or 8 blocks away from the World Trade Center, and yet
dude was thinking about which buildings were the tallest. Which buildings are the tallest? Do I have the tallest building in Manhattan? That's what he was thinking about on September 11th, okay? Those are the caliber of people we're dealing with. Honestly, we should have known back then that Donald Trump was like a Republican scumbag. Okay, that's all beside the point. I just want to give you an idea of the type of people we're dealing with here. Let me show you this clip from Pat Robertson. This one is from 2013, and I believe that this one is about the gay community and HIV. Listen to this one. This is Pat Robertson again.
You know what they do in San Francisco, some of the gay community, they want to get people, so if they've got the stuff.
The stuff being HIV.
So if they've got the stuff, they'll have a ring, you shake hands, and the ring's got a little thing where you cut your finger.
Really?
Yeah.
No, not really. What's he even talking about? It's completely made up. Has this literally ever happened in the history of ever? Seriously. He's just coming up with this garbage right off the top of his head and says it like it's a fact. Who is it on his staff that's feeding him this information? Does he know how to use the internet in the first place? I would think he got this from the internet if I thought he knew how to use it.
Really?
Yeah, really. I mean, it's that kind of vicious stuff, which would be the equivalent of murder.
Yes, it would, if that ever happened, literally ever. Jesus Christ, dude, this is absolutely nuts. Check this one out, mid-October 2020. For context, this is right before the 2020 election took place. This is like 2 weeks before the election actually happened, before the voting happened. He had some things to say about Donald Trump.
There's going to be a war. Ezekiel 38 is going to be the next thing down the line, then a time of peace, then maybe the end. But nobody knows the day or the hour when the Lord's going to come back. He said the angels don't know it, and only the Father knows it. So I'm not saying this is the second coming, but I am saying there are things.
It kind of sounds like you're saying this is the second coming a little bit, right?
But I am saying there are things that people have thought would be during a millennial time with the coming of Jesus that are going to happen in our lifetime. And the next thing is the election that's coming up in just a few weeks, at which time...
I do want to address the thing that he just said there. Hang on, play it again here.
That are going to happen in our lifetime.
So what he said there, it'll happen in our lifetime, that relates to his claim in 1980 that it would be here in 1982. Now, the reason that he believed that is because Israel was reformed as a country in 1947, and Pat Robertson is one of a group of religious nutcases who believed that within the generation that was alive to witness the reformation of Israel, within that generation, Jesus will come again. Now, Jehovah's Witnesses have the exact same belief, except that the date is 1914 rather than when Israel was reformed in 1947 or 1948 or whenever it was. So he has a very similar position to Jehovah's Witnesses in that sense. But we'll get into that more in a second when we watch his clip here. But keep listening here.
And the next thing is the election that's coming up in just a few weeks, at which time, according to what I believe the Lord told me,
this sounds like a prophecy to me, right? Is this a prophecy we're about to hear?
The president is going to be reelected. I'm saying by all means, get out and vote for whoever you want to vote for, but by all means, let your voice be heard.
Ooh, boy. I guess that fell flat, didn't it?
But it's going to lead to civil unrest of a great proportion, then a war against Israel and so forth and so on.
Wow. So Trump is going to be reelected, he says. God told him that Trump's going to be reelected in 2020. That's going to lead to civil disobedience and protests and riots and stuff, which will be the beginning of Armageddon, basically. That's what he claimed just now, right? For what it's worth, he's actually made an appearance on American Dad before. I don't know if you guys watch this show or not, but check this out. In this episode, Stan, the dude on the left here, was hanging out with some gay friends that he had, and they were about to go on a cruise, and they didn't allow him onto the boat.
Brett.
He is a Republican, by the way. Stan is a giga Republican.
Brett, tell this guy I'm okay. Tell him you can't have a log cabin event without me.
You're not invited, Stan.
What? Why?
Because your son stopped by the office today and dropped off this.
It's a picture of him and Pat Robertson.
So it's me and hate-monger Pat Robertson. I met him at some party.
Anti-gay palooza.
I was just walking through.
Hosted and funded by Stan Smith.
It was just a momentary lapse of judgment.
7th annual. That's so funny, dude.
My mind's a blank.
So anyway, yeah, Pat Robertson has definitely made an impact on pop culture in many ways. So I wanted to watch this 1980 film from the guy with that little preamble. I want to see what he had to say in this 1980 edition of the 700 Club. This is his TV show that he's been running since forever. And listen to his false prediction. By the way, if you're unfamiliar with the 700 Club, why they call it that or whatever else, there's a TV network called CBN, Christian Broadcasting Network, I think is what it is. CBN. And CBN, back in whenever it was that Pat Robertson was first getting involved in televangelism, CBN was like a really big Christian network, but they were going under. They were losing money and couldn't stay on the air. So Pat Robertson decides to step in at the time and hold a big fundraiser to fund CBN, to keep it on the air. And the name of the fundraiser was the 700 Club because he wanted to get 700 donations or something like that to keep it running. It was just supposed to be a single fundraising event, but it was so successful that it turned into a regular TV show for him. And that was where he really got his start. That's how he really got famous, was running the 700 Club. So this is one of the episodes. Let's listen to what he had to say on the 700 Club all the way back in 1980.
Thank you. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this edition of the 700 Club. We're talking about the most important land in all the world. You say, well, I thought that was Russia or the United States. No, it isn't. We're going to be talking about Israel. That's the land of the Bible. And we have with us some very lovely singers. one lovely singer and one gentleman, and also a producer from Israel, whose name is Yaakov Gerasi, and he is a producer for 10 musicians, former Israeli intelligence officer. We have an interview with the Israeli ambassador, and we'll also be looking at the fact that within 2 weeks, the Prime Minister of Israel and the President of Egypt, Anwar Sadat, will be coming to Washington to try to move some negotiations along the way. So Ben Kinslow's here.
And of course, he believes that this is like significant for biblical prophecy or whatever.
With me, and how are you, sir?
Absolutely excellent, sir. I thought you'd never ask.
Okay.
I'm telling you, if I don't get a chance to tell somebody that at least once a day, it just blows my whole first 5 minutes.
Okay.
Super. You were talking about Israel being the most important land in the world. Let me ask you this. Why is Israel so important? I mean, what is it about this little bitty country that sits right down in the middle of, like, you can't hardly find it. They can't even put the name on it. Had to put it out in the ocean. What makes it so important?
It's really not important. A lot of the televangelists or evangelicals' prophecies about it are complete garbage. They're nonsense. But let me tell you why they believe that this is important. The main reason why they need Israel to exist as a country is not because the Bible says that it will exist necessarily or directly. It doesn't. But it's because in the Old Testament, mentions of the Messiah say that the Messiah will take control of the political structure in Israel in the end. The Son of Man specifically, which is supposed to be this cosmic judge that, comes to prominence and takes control of the political system in Israel and sparks the rapture and Armageddon into being, basically. That's the idea. That's why they believe that Israel's so important. If Israel doesn't exist, there's no political structure to be taken over by the Son of Man eventually. So they need Israel to exist for this prophecy to even have a chance of being fulfilled.
Well, it has been a land bridge in history between the two great powers. There were two major civilizations in the ancient world. One was in the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, what is now modern-day Iraq. It was then Babylonia and then Assyria. The other civilization was in the Nile Valley, and that was called Egypt. And the land bridge between them was Israel. Now, God has called this in the Bible the navel of the earth. Now, a navel is sort of like the place where a child is attached to its mother, and God used this as the place where He entered into human history, both through the prophets, through Abraham, through the patriarchs of old, and through Jesus Christ. This has been the center of God's activity and His revelation in the earth, and that's
Is that weird to anybody else? Is it odd to anyone else that everything that took place theologically for, Christianity or for Judaism or whatever all happened here? I mean, there are other countries around that have different origin myths that place, God creating things or entering into the earth or whatever in their regions. Obviously, it seems obvious to me, the reason that the origin myths all center around Israel is because that's who came up with the origin myths, right? City Rail Dude, you claim Christianity started as a cult, but if that were true, why would the founders of the faith endure extreme persecution and not give up? Okay, I assume you're talking about, like, the people, like Jesus and his disciples were kind of like a weird little Christian cult. I mean, hell, Jehovah's Witnesses feed off of persecution and refuse to give up on any of it, even though everything that they claim is objectively false. Not that that's what makes a cult. Jonestown suffered lots of persecution. Heaven's Gate was only 39 people total, give or take, and they suffered terrible persecution. They never gave up, even though a lot of their things were false, even though they were super controlling. Doesn't necessarily, I mean, they're not mutually exclusive. You can have something be true or false. You can have something be controlling or not controlling. So anyway, yeah, thanks for the super chat. I appreciate it. Feel free to smash that like button if you so choose. Although you are not obligated to, you can optionally poke it gently if you choose. I understand that either works just as well. And some people prefer not to smash. Some people prefer to poke. So just keep it in mind.
In the earth. And that's why all the world, the United Nations and the nations of the earth, one day are going to come and move against Israel.
So that's the prophecy, or that's Pat Robertson's interpretation of biblical prophecy, that all nations are going to move against Israel. There are some really complicated, weird interpretations of various different verses to back that up. I don't really agree that that's what the Bible was saying, but they're standard beliefs within Christianity. So it's found across different denominations commonly.
Now, the next thing that this thing is so important, Ben, I believe it's very, very significant, is in I'd give it 1982, but date setting is dangerous. I'd say within the next couple of years, we're going to see a war there. The next major war to be fought in the world is going to be right here.
And there you go. There's his end times prediction. Date setting is dangerous, he says. You think? But he thinks that the end will, or the war that will begin, will start in 1982, or by 1982, he said. I love it, dude.
Here?
Here.
Why?
Because the Bible says so. And Russia, the Bible says, is going to invade. Now, why would it?
The Bible says Russia's going to invade? Did Russia exist during Bible times? Of course not. The Bible doesn't say anything about Russia. That's completely made up. It mentions Gog and Magog as like these ethereal entities or these cryptic beings or properties. Some Bible scholars think Magog is land, like a physical location, and Gog is like a person. But there's really no way to know because they were just some words scattered throughout random verses that weren't really connected to anything. He is assuming that Magog is Russia. No reason to believe that. But building from that premise, it led him to the conclusion that Russia is going to attack Israel eventually, which is going to spark Armageddon into place. And all world powers are going to meet on the battleground of Israel eventually. And then it's going to be a thermonuclear holocaust. He believes that nukes are going to be launched all over the place, everywhere in the world. And then God's going to step in and save people, basically.
Now, why would Russia want to invade Israel?
They wouldn't.
Well, the truth is that when it's all shaken down, there isn't one major army in any of the Arab countries with the possible exception of Egypt. Egypt is the only one that's ever had any kind of force. Syria has some modest forces, Jordan has modest forces, but none are as strong as Israel. Now, the Soviets are in Afghanistan. They're moving shortly into Iran.
So this is before the Soviet Union fell. The Soviet Union fell, I think, in 1991. This is 1980 when this came out. So he still has this kind of Red Scare mindset right now. That's probably why he's convinced Russia's going to attack Israel, because he has no clue what their motivations are, what makes them tick, or any of that stuff, and certainly didn't foresee the Soviet Union crumbling like it did.
Iran. The Iranians are as if they're trying to provoke the United States to war. It's the most amazing thing.
Well, I think that was the other way around. The U.S. kind of provoked Iran into war a little bit, but okay.
It's the most amazing thing. They continuously provoke us. And
I mean, have you guys ever heard the story of the Shah of Iran? Or Iran? I'm mispronouncing it. I apologize. So the Shah of Iran was basically a puppet dictator that was installed in Iran that was loyal to the United States. And he was absolutely terrible. He was absolutely awful. Mistreated the people terribly. I can't even find the Wikipedia article. Oh, here it is. Mistreated people terribly, all of his people. It was ugly. He ruled with an iron fist, at the behest of the United States, until the people finally rose up and basically threw him out. He finally fled to the U.S. eventually for surgery. He had cancer or something like that, and that was like the pretext. He ran to get treatment, but really he was running because they were kicking his ass out. And then the Khomeinis took control. I think that's who it was. I could have my history wrong here. Somebody in the comments can correct me if I got that messed up. But yeah, the Khomeinis stepped in, which were kind of leaders of the protests and rebellions and stuff like that. But they were also religious nutcases. The Khomeinis were like super, super, super Muslim and believed that women should be, subdued and suppressed and all of that other good stuff. Eventually, Ayatollah, he was installed as an Ayatollah. Ayatollah Khomeini died in the 90s, I think, and then it became like a dynasty, basically. His son, I believe, stepped in, which is the current Ayatollah Khomeini, if I remember correctly. Now, Iran has moved in a slightly more progressive direction where they have a president now, Rouhani, I think is his name, President Rouhani. But Khomeini is still very much the leader of the country. It's a theocracy, full-blown theocracy. I mean, there were pictures of Iran in the 70s. Iran women bench is all I had to Google. And you can see pictures of women sitting on benches before, like in the 1970s. Here you go. Here's a picture of some women reading books sitting on a bench in Iran. Like, this would never fly with no hijabs or anything and like skirts. This would never happen today. Never. Because it's a theocracy. So anyways, the point is the U.S. orchestrated that entire thing back forever ago. Iran did not provoke the U.S. to war when Pat Robertson was talking about this. I don't know. Maybe they did some messed up stuff, but the U.S. most definitely started it.
Provoke us, and you can just see the tempers flaring in our nation saying, let's go over there and show those fellows a lesson. It's almost as if something is goading somebody there to bring us against them. Well, when we do that, and we certainly have a right to,
we have a right to send people to Iran to murder a bunch of people. We have a right to do that. What a disgusting thing to say, right? I mean, sanctions are justified. And honestly, at this point in time, like right now, I might even be able to justify a land war with Iran. I don't know. I would have to think about that pretty hard because they're doing some really bad stuff. And they have been doing bad stuff for a while. Nuclear proliferation, mistreating their people, public executions, and all kinds of really, really horrific, messed up stuff. But to say such a thing back then, I don't know, man. I don't know. Pat Robertson was always... This is the problem with evangelicals. The problem is that they are rooting for a war. They are behind every... There's a silver lining behind every mushroom cloud with these people. They want this to happen desperately. They're excited for it. They're waiting with bated breath for the United States to go in and start some shit with Middle Eastern countries to spark Armageddon into being. That's the problem here. Honestly, deeply disgusting. Horrific stuff, man. In my opinion, if you are this brand of evangelical, you're an extremist. If you are rooting for and waiting with bated breath for a war in the Middle East, you should not be allowed near a position of power. It's extremism, plain and simple.
Then they will be weakened, and that will just set them up for a Soviet takeover. I dare say their government is infiltrated terribly by Soviets right now. So the Bible tells us that the Russians and Iran are going to come against Israel. They will also be joined by Ethiopia. Now, you notice what's next to Ethiopia?
Actually, I happen to know. I mean, it's really hard to see, hard to make out there, but I happen to know exactly what this is, and the answer is it's your mom.
Big country is Sudan.
Oh, I was close.
It's my understanding that President Sadat is already looking at ways that he can come and bring about a peaceful transfer of power in the Sudan to secure Egypt, because the headwaters of the Nile into this area.
Dude, literally all of this completely made up. None of this was based in reality, even back then. Even with the information that he had at the time, like the political information, it was ridiculous to come to these conclusions.
If they cut off their water, it'll be a serious thing. And so there are some secret maneuvers going on down in Egypt right now.
There are secret maneuvers going on in Egypt? And how would you know this, Pat? And why would you broadcast this to a massive audience of thousands, tens of thousands, who knows, hundreds of thousands of people? Really? Secret maneuvers, you say? Okay.
Now with the possibility of securing that. The president of Egypt is probably the greatest statesman in the world today. He is a man who says God speaks to him. Yesterday he said, God told me to invite the Shah of Iran to come to Egypt. God told me.
Oh, okay. I guess at the time the Shah of Iran was still in power or something. I mean, I didn't realize that. When did the Shah of Iran was removed in 1979? Oh, wow. Wait a minute. So is this video from 1979, maybe? Or from 1978, somewhere in there? The Iranian Revolution happened in 1978, apparently. Hell, maybe this is even earlier than 1980. I was pretty sure it was 1980, but okay. Wow. That's really interesting, actually.
He was influenced by reading a book by a Baptist minister, Lloyd Douglas, called The Magnificent Obsession. He was put in jail by the British, and while in prison, he read the story of Jesus Christ, and it changed his life. So he went boldly to Israel, and said,
We're talking the Shah of Iran, right? Was the Shah of Iran... I'm sorry, the Shah of Iran, I keep mispronouncing it. Was the Shah of Iran a Muslim or a Christian? I thought he was a Muslim. Like I said, it doesn't really matter in the end. He was, a puppet dictator for the United States, so...
I'll agree to live in peace with you. And out of that came the Camp David Accords, which resulted in, let's go over and look at this map over here, a significant concession on the part of
Wow, dude, look at the size of that globe. I thought he was looking at like a physical piece of paper, a map that he was pointing to. That's a friggin' globe. Look at that thing. I would love to have one of those bad boys in my living room. That would be metal, right?
Israel. And here's what happened. You see that whole Sinai region, it's an enormous amount of land. I talked to the Shimon Peres, who was Secretary of Defense, head of the defense minister in Israel some years ago, and he said this has no potential for Israel at all, except the threat that it carries to our land. They had discovered oil there. They had also built naval bases, and they had fought long and hard to secure certain passes that were the key routes into Egypt. They surrendered all this, gave it back to Egypt as the peace treaty was signed. Now that's in accord with the Bible, because the Bible says the territory of Israel should extend from the Wadi El Arish, that's called the River of Egypt, right?
So if the country of Israel does not include the sections that the Bible describes it as having, then it doesn't count? Is that what he's trying to say? I think that's what he's saying. Earth is flat, dummy, lol. Okay. My mistake. Are they saying that they need to take more land from Palestine and Egypt before the end can come or something?
Down to the Gulf of Aqaba, which is where, at Eilat, where Solomon had his mines, and he used that for trading. Mm-hmm. Now, that was the border of ancient Israel. But you can see that much was surrendered. They said, here, in our peace treaty, to have peace with you, so the line now of Egypt has come up to here. And
so, I guess he's saying that because Egypt got more land. I mean, don't believe a word out of his mouth. He could be lying about anything in here. So who knows if any of this is even true. But I think he's saying that Israel did a deal with Egypt to take more land to trade for oil or something like that, and by doing so, set themselves up to be in such a situation where Armageddon could come.
Okay. And so Sadat says, I want to live in peace with you. But the Bible says there's going to be peace. And sooner or later, Syria up here has got to be at peace. Now, these are the Golan Heights that are a disputed area that Israel now has charge of. But as I read my Bible, there's got to be a move of the Israel territory one day up to the Euphrates River, which is up north of Damascus.
Okay, there you go. So there's even more land that Israel has to take. The problem is Israel did not exist until 1947 or 1948 or something. It was destroyed, and the Jewish people were nomadic for like thousands of years or something. I don't even know when Israel was originally destroyed. When they were placed back down in Israel in 1947, there was already a country there. There were already people living there, the Palestinians, and they had an even stronger claim to it than the Israelites did, because they were already there. Like, how are you going to just kick their asses out and claim to own the area now? And not only did they claim to own the area and set up a government, but they said to the Palestinians, you can't be a part of the government. They wanted a religious ethno state. Absolutely nuts, man, how it all played out. It's really sad. I'm, just disappointed to see how it all happened, and how it continues to play out to this day. Really ugly for the Palestinians, but let's keep listening.
So there might be some territorial exchanges before it's all over with. This is what's called the West Bank, and it sits like a bulge right in the middle of
that would be parts of Palestine at the time. So the borders have changed multiple times. I think once in 1947 they set the borders, and those are the legally recognized international established borders, recognized by the UN, the US, China, and a bunch of others. But Israel kept expanding and creating settlements and kicking Palestinians out of land that was legally considered theirs. So the borders changed in 1947 and then again in 1984, I believe. And then they changed again in 91, I think. I don't remember when they've changed, but it's been a bunch of times. And they just built new settlements not that long ago. It's terrible.
Israeli territory.
Well, why do they call it the West Bank? What is the West Bank or what? It's
of the Jordan River. You see, this is west and this is east, and so this is the territory known as the West Bank of the Jordan River. Now, Jordan came into being in 1948 by United Nations declaration. This was all a British...
I guess it all happened in 1948 at the same time, I think. Israel became a country in 1948. Jordan did too, apparently. I'm not really super familiar with the time.
Mandate called Palestine. And in 1948, it was partitioned, and this part went to what is called Israel. This part went to Jordan. Well, now after the 1967 war, Israel took over the West Bank, defeated Jordan, defeated Egypt.
That's right. The borders changed in 1948, 1967, and 1984 again, I believe.
And took the Sinai, and in 1973, actually, they moved into this area as well, but they took the West Bank, and so doing secured East Jerusalem and Bethlehem and some of these sites. Now, in the United Nations, just recently, there was a vote that this should all be given back to the Arabs, including East Jerusalem.
Absolutely, yes.
Well, according to my Bible, the Jews must hold all of Jerusalem or Jesus Christ isn't coming back again.
See, this is the type of person, this is the idea that permeates the Republican Party to this day. You think Republicans like Jewish people? No. They need Israel to exist before Jesus can come back. That's why they support Israel. They do not like Jews. Never have. Never will. They are infidels for all intents and purposes. They need Israel to exist. That's as deep as it goes.
And I look with some disfavor on the United States casting any vote at all that says the Jews have got to give up East Jerusalem.
Now, this guy doesn't hold political office himself, but influences public policy heavily. Always has.
Because Jesus' coming is dependent on that. And I'm not going to let any of them hold him back. I'm so happy they've got it, I don't know what to do personally. And President Carter, being a born-again Christian, felt the same way. And he immediately called the ambassador and said, this is not in accordance with my instructions to you. Now, how they got out of hand up there, I don't know. It was very embarrassing. He had what they say egg on his face. How did it happen? But nevertheless, he feels very strongly about East Jerusalem, and Jerusalem was mentioned in that United Nations resolution about 4 or 5 times.
Yeah, Jimmy Carter was he was a Democrat. He was left-leaning, but he's also very, very evangelical, like a giga-religious nutbag. Although I feel Carter was not anywhere near as corrupt as some of the other presidents we've had in modern history, so there's that, I guess.
And plus all this territory. Now, this is where the Jews are making settlements, and
illegal settlements, yes, that's right, they are. They're against international law, and they should be sanctioned for that.
Palestinians are concerned right now about some settlements in Hebron. Now, today, the Palestinians have launched widespread strikes to protest the Israeli cabinet's decision to permit the establishment of 2 Jewish schools.
Well, the Israeli government stepped in and broke international law and used their military to expand. It was ugly, especially back then. It's ugly now. They took property that doesn't belong to them and hurt people in the process terribly. So yeah, absolutely. They should protest that 100%. Yes, most definitely.
In the all-Arab city of Hebron. And the American Middle East envoy, Saul Linowitz, has asked Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin to freeze Jewish settlements on the West Bank. The hotly disputed issue is expected to be high on the president's list when he meets separately with the Begin and Anwar Sadat at the White House in another several weeks. Now, let's go from this point and look back into the history of the Middle East and Israel to see if we can get some concept of how this controversy took place. Here's that report. Well, that's the situation. Thank you very much, Peter.
Wow, that was fast. Yeah, I couldn't find the full original episode. I could just find this 18-minute clip, so I guess that was cut out.
Sort of brings us up to date of where things are. You might be interested one more time to take a quick look at the West Bank territory, and you notice that the distance between the edge of the West Bank, if that is totally returned to Jordan or if there's an independent Palestinian state, that only gives Israel 30 miles or so to the ocean. They're cut in that little narrow neck of land, and it's highly unlikely that the Jewish people are going to give that up. Now, again, talking to some of the leaders over there, they were in favor of letting the Arab people have a state that would be the same type of state as Texas, for example, inside of Israel, where you could have a legislature, but they would have their own control. But they call this the occupied territory.
That would be kind of interesting, but ultimately, Israel is run by a right-wing government, or at the very least right now, and has been since the 90s, basically. The guy that currently runs it is a guy named Netanyahu, and he's a far-right nutter-butter who has a vested interest in creating a religious ethno-state and doesn't want anyone else involved in the government at all. It's an apartheid situation, a segregated situation, where if you aren't a certain ethnicity or religion, then you cannot, take part in government. You can't take part in certain schools. You can't go to, use the bathroom in certain areas, things like that. It's really, really ugly. It's bad.
It's under military government, and what the Jews probably don't want, however, is a million or so Arabs that would suddenly become Israeli citizens. That might upset the balance. So,
how would that upset the balance? Are you kidding me? That what they don't want is for a million or so Arabs to become citizens. That would upset the balance, he says. What the hell is happening right now? This is so deeply wrong. Seriously. Nearly certain that he isn't thinking about this objectively. This is all through the lens of religion. This is all through the lens of, there's a silver lining behind every mushroom cloud, and whatever I can do to get us there faster, I'll do.
Difficult problem, but the key is Jerusalem, which is their capital, and that's right here. And the Jewish people are not going to give up East Jerusalem. And the Arabs, I think the extremists, the Palestinians or the Russians or somebody, are going to insist in it. And although the Jewish people may be quite conciliatory on many, many things, that one thing I think they'll never give up.
Well, it actually gets even deeper than that as far as like the conflict goes between Israel and Palestine. So there are time periods in Judaism that are marked by when certain temples existed, okay? So there's the first temple, the second temple, and now they want to build a third temple. Those time periods have been significant within Judaism since the very beginning. They've had a vested interest in building a third temple, which, according to Judaism, would kind of bring them into the New Age, and according to Christianity, would be the beginning of the end. It'd basically be like the start of Armageddon or whatever. But the problem here is that the temple, which for the ex-Jehovah's Witnesses out there, is the same temple that fell in 607/587 BCE. That whole argument that Jehovah's Witnesses engage in. It actually fell in 587, not 607. But Jehovah's Witnesses insist they're right about this. Anyways, it's that temple. The problem is that the temple has to be built in a very specific location with very specific dimensions. They've wanted to put this third temple up, but there's an incredibly sacred mosque there in its location. Until that mosque is gone, they cannot create a third temple, and the only way to get rid of it is to destroy it, and that would just, oh my God, that would be an ugly mess. So, Israelites have not done that. I hope they never do. But yeah, I think that's probably the next step in Pat Robertson's theology. Judaism believes in no end third temple be a complete utopia. That was from Kootmaster. I appreciate that. Yeah, they think that it would be a utopia once it's erected, right? Okay. Dome of the Rock, right? That's the location of the mosque, I believe, and that's where the third temple needs to be constructed. Yeah, I just don't think that this is ever going to happen, honestly. I think that mosque will be there forever.
The final straw that will trigger a major war.
Let me ask you one question before we move off of this. Just for example, there are like 4.5 billion or thereabouts, 4.3 billion people on the face of the earth.
That's right.
And
wow, 1978, I guess, 4.3 billion people, and now there are like 8 billion, right?
And there are 30 million Jews or thereabouts?
No. In the whole world?
In Israel right about now.
3.5.
Or 3.5 million Jews all living in here, in Israel, this particular point in time.
I think my figures are right. It's something.
Jews are the highest concentration in New York City outside of Israel. This is the highest concentration of Jewish people outside of Israel. It's kind of interesting.
Okay, now, what is it, for example, that says, why isn't it Ethiopia or...
Because we're working with myths that came out of Israel. That's why. Ethiopia have their own creation myths.
South America or whatever. Why is this particular thing such a hot spot and the continuing friction between the Jews and Arabs in that part?
If the Western world had based their religion off of Ethiopian, creation myths, then Ethiopia would be like the center of like where God entered or whatever. It's that simple, honestly. Stampede 122, Pat, is as old as a dino at this point. Oh, absolutely, dude. I think he gave the show over to his son, but he does guest appearances on it now. How old is this guy? He's got to be like 90-something now, right? Pat Robertson is 92 years old. Wow. He's actually younger than I thought. I was shooting for 97. That's crazy, dude.
Well, I think with Sadat's visit, the Arabs are going to begin to live at peace with Israel. I don't think that Israel's problems are going to come from Jordan. The Israelis have saved King Hussein's life on one occasion. They warned him of a plot to kill him, and he owes them. The Saudis are sort of almost living on borrowed time. And
living on borrowed time. Is he saying he thinks the Saudi Arabia is going to be destroyed at some point soon? What?
they don't want to stir up too much trouble. Sadat has made the bold move in Egypt to make peace. The Syrians and the Iraqis talk very tough. They're the hardliners. Gaddafi over in Libya, who is
now dead. Yeah, Gaddafi is gone. Gaddafi from Libya, he was unceremoniously torn off of his throne and killed by a crowd of protesters. Matter of fact, they actually, you know how he died? They took a spear and they, rammed it up, like that. It's pretty bad, right up the backside. And I'm wondering to myself when I hear that, do you guys think that there was a guy on the other end, trying to thread a needle, got an eye closed? Or do you think they just tore an entirely new hole? Let me know what you think in the comments. Was there a needle threader on the other end, or did they just open a brand new hole?
Considered by some a radical, some have called him a madman. He is very anti-Israel, but the moderate...
He's dead now, of course.
Arabs, I think, would like to get the whole thing out of the way. They don't need it any longer, and they would just as soon make peace. The Palestinians are the people, perhaps, who are giving some trouble, but they are very highly educated, very intelligent people, and many of the leaders recognize that if they joined in some confederation with Israel, it might be the greatest nation in the Middle East. So, they're just radicals who are trying to stir up the trouble primarily, and the leaders don't dare be the statesmen they'd like to be. Sadat was a statesman. The others are afraid that they'll be assassinated if they come out in favor of it.
His political analysis is so shallow and uninformed and entirely based on what he believes the Bible says, which is a misinterpretation of a lot of this stuff, or just completely fabricated right out of the ether. A lot of the things that he believes, like the idea that Magog is Russia, was never stated in the Bible, never even implied. He just made that shit up completely. So all of his political analysis about this situation is built on sand. And that's obvious at this point. We've seen how this whole thing played out, and it did not play out the way that he thought. I mean, this video is about him making a prediction that the end would come in 1982. Just completely made up. Mike A., the Dome of the Rock is supposedly where the Holy of Holies was. Also, stuff like this is why evangelicals went wild when Trump moved the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. Yeah, absolutely. You're absolutely right. And he also claims to have created peace in the Middle East. He didn't. In reality, they're called the Abraham Accords, and basically what happened was he started paying Middle Eastern countries in the area, Saudi Arabia and others, to openly trade with Israel. They were already kind of doing black market trading or under the table trading with Israel, but Donald Trump took our tax dollars, mine and yours, and sent them to Saudi Arabia as a bribe to operate in the open with Israel in trade. That's not peace in the Middle East. They're still fighting. There are still people dying right now as we speak, while our money is being sent to Saudi Arabia. People are still dying. But for what it's worth, one of the qualities of the Antichrist was supposed to be that he was going to bring peace in the Middle East. So there's that.
I mean, it's a very rough area. But when it's all said and done, this is the place where God and Satan are going to square off, because this is the turf. In other words, this is the playing field. The playing field isn't in Ethiopia. It's not in...
So, yeah, the guy asked, why is it in Israel rather than Ethiopia? And the answer is because the Western world based their religion off of the religion that came out of Israel. If we had based it off of the one that came out of Ethiopia, then it would be Ethiopia. And his answer is...
Satan are going to square off, because this is the turf. In other words, this
just because. That's his answer. Just because. Okay.
The playing field. The playing field isn't in Ethiopia. It's not in Washington, D.C. It's in Jerusalem. That's the city. And that's where the forces are going to collide, because that's the way God wants it.
Well, I mean, how else do you answer it? The truth is, because we based our religion off of that one. There is no other real answer. So, Pat Robertson can't say anything but because.
Well, anyhow, let's have some music. We have a lady here that Pat Boone said sings like an angel, I think. Music's...
Yeah, that's going to be a hard pass for me. Anyway, thank you so much, Pat Robertson, for that insightful political analysis that totally 100% came true, without a doubt. So, yeah, that's Pat Robertson for you. I mean, let me know what you think of the guy in the comments. I think he's absolutely ridiculous, top to bottom, has been since day one. All the way back to, 1960. Dude's 92 years old now. And he's been ridiculous since he first entered into Christian ministry, into televangelism. And he progressively got more ridiculous as time went on, apparently. Actually prophesying that Donald Trump would win the presidency. Can you stick your foot in your mouth any more than that? Seriously. Anyway, let me know what you think about it in the comments. I think it's hilarious, honestly.